Hello and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm super excited to host Bonsart Bokel. Bonsart is the creator behind Radio Retro Future on YouTube and is the author of the Association of Ishtar series. With over 12 years of studying steampunk, Bonsart began with writing short stories that evolved into the Association of Ishtar, resulting in some of the most expansive steampunk settings to date. In 2024, so just last year, he expanded all of these kind of pursuits into gaming, which has led to the TTRPG Night Watch, which I'm really keen to dig into shortly. Bonsart is also passionate about educating people about steampunk, which is great. I love steampunk, all about the world building, history, and visual storytelling, and enjoys giving workshops on these subjects as well. Bonsart, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So before we get into your background, which I'm quite curious about, the game that you brought to the figurative, desert island today is Arkham Horror, a kind of a classic and something that a game that a lot of people point to as almost like the archetype, living card game, aspect of the genre there. But tell me about it. Like, what is it and why do you love it so much?
I do not actually remember how I got into it. I think a friend of mine had it when I was still in high school, so I've been playing this game off and on for 25 years, I think. I really enjoyed it. I got my own copy so I could play it with my own friends at home. And what I like best about it, like currently I'm also really working on developing my own board game next to Night Watch, also inspired by our setting. I really love the narrative experience that it provides. And just kind of like how all these unrelated events that happen around the board kind of like formulate into a single story. Um, so that's kind of like what I like about it. Um, you also have that nice build up. There's all these various strategies you can use to win the game, and for every opponent you need like a kind of like different strategy. It's also a very unforgiving game. The difficulty of Arkham Horror can spike from too easy to far too hard. Um, but yeah, you just kind of, it's kind of roguelike like that almost. And then you've got like all the expansions that you can apply, so you can really make it a game that you want to play in that way. And that's kind of like inspired me, and now I'm working on my own board game. I really appreciate like why all the decisions they have made, why they did things in a particular way. So that's also very interesting from a developer perspective.
I haven't played it, embarrassingly, but I've read a lot about it, and I've a lot of folks I know who are developing, living card games, especially like point to it as the archetype. I understand like there's a very good balance between playability and narrative driven kind of playability, but also replayability. How do you think it achieves that? Like why, on the surface, if you were describing games like Arkham Horror or, I don't know, the Lord of the Rings living card game or any kind of living card game. A lot of times if you're not familiar with them, you worry that they're gonna get boring and you won't be able to replay them. And so like what about games like this, especially Arkham Horror, makes it so replayable, right?
Well, you do not consume all the content in one game.
Mm.
In order to consume all the content, you have to like play a couple dozen games. Um, I think they've been very economical. I mean, it can be quite some work to set up because there's a lot of different card sets that you need to separate, but it's not undoable. Like I think you can do it in like 5 minutes if you've got enough practice in it. So there's that. There's a lot of content in there. Like there's all these variations. There's lots of cards of each who all have like three story elements in many cases. Um, it's also how they organize the board, which they organize kind of like in sectors, like with each its own color, and for each location, every card has like stories for each of the locations in that sector. Um, And I also like every, um the names they've given to the locations, and the even if you do not know, like, I was not familiar with Lovecraft's work at that time, when I started playing it. I heard about it, of course, but yeah, that also really made me curious about, the Cthulhu mythos and all these gods and where they came from. Um, so that's something that I really like to achieve with my own, games as well, and people are like, "Oh, that's interesting. Where does that come from?" So, so for me, it's also really brought me into this universe. So that is it is like the wonderful thing about cross media. There's so many ways to enjoy certain franchises, and I think for me, Arkham Horror really like opened that world of possibilities for me. Like, you've got Warhammer, but for me that's mostly just for me. I just loved painting the miniatures. I never really cared that much about the game. I like the lore, but even that I do not care much about, especially with all the decisions that Games Workshop has made as of late. Um, but yeah, for me, it was. I think there's also a big nostalgia factor for me. In that regard, that it was like the first game that really brought me into cross media products. I'm not sure if I played Warhammer at the time. Probably because those people probably brought me in contact with this game in the first place. But
Interesting. So, like, this whole concept of, like, multiple ways to enjoy cross media, multiple ways to enjoy, like, IP. I can feel like there's a lot of comparables here of, like, some of the stuff that you're doing with the, Association of Ishtar series, but there's something about bite-sized glimpses of wider, universes, wider
oh,
worlds
definitely,
that
yeah.
that feels quite inviting. And when you're looking about it in a board game or a card game, that you are literally are able to provide almost controlled glimpses into, this world, and especially if there's depth within the world, it allows then someone to fall deep into that rabbit hole if they're wanting to. So, like, how are you like, are you taking a lot of cues from games like Arkham Horror in terms of how you're thinking of developing your own kind of, board game for your universe? And is that, like, why start with a TTRPG versus a board game, in terms of of, like, fleshing out or diving into the universe a little bit more?
Well, I mean, for TTRPGs, I mean, technically, game technically wise, they are more complex. Um, However, you don't really have to worry about balancing that much, at least not in the way how we're doing it. Um, and you only need a book. And nothing at the moment is easier than getting a book out. But like, this game that we're making also has cards, so now I need to like reach out to other companies, and then you're also you're gonna have to deal with quotes and stuff. Like, all my books up till now, I just ordered through Amazon. Couldn't have been easier. You order them at Amazon, just send them straight to the distributor, and you're done. You couldn't wish for anything easier than that. Just after, shipping is the biggest challenge. But now it's like, okay, I send out this week, I send out quotes to like half a dozen companies or so. I got recommended some other ones that are in Europe that I still need to reach out to. But you gotta like deal with the cards and
And the
get
packaging
those
for the
printed,
cards and the yeah.
and the game master screen, and all these components that you cannot like get printed as easily. Um, so that's like one of my biggest hurdles for this particular project. I mean, I'm still working on the core rule book. I mean, I underestimated how much time that would take me to like create the layout and all that stuff. And I even have the benefit that I can do it myself. Right, because I know a lot of people who have to like pay people lots and lots of money to get those layouts down. Um, so I'm very fortunate in that regard. Um, but yeah, I mean, if it's just books, it's easy. If there's any other component other than books, I mean, posters is pretty easy here in the Netherlands. Not as easy in the United States as I hear. Um, but all the card components and all that stuff, that's a lot more challenging.
Interesting that you're speaking about this from the point of view of, like, the production aspect of it. As somebody who's, like, thinking about it from a world building perspective, I imagine that one of the reasons why, that you pointed to in terms of Arkham Horror is that you could get playing. There was a lot of content, but then it got you into this wider mythos that already existed. It wasn't like Arkham Horror came first and then Cthulhu grew out of it. Maybe from a world building perspective, I had thought that maybe an RPG to me actually sounds a lot more complicated in terms of the amount of work and the effort that you have to put into in order to create um, a lot of the accoutrement required for somebody to have an understanding of the fleshed out world and something for a soft landing for when you fall down that rabbit hole. So if you're writing these books already, if you're creating these RPGs, already, it just feels like that does make sense from a narrative perspective that you create the giant bottle dungeon before you create the opening, you know, which could be a card
Mhm.
game. So I feel like that's where I thought you were kind of going to go, and but it's fascinating about the production because as someone who hasn't done an RPG, um, that scares me a hell of a lot more than the board game, than creating a board game and working out the components. Like to me, that's nice. That's very straightforward. Um, or at least more straightforward. So I'm fascinated by that. I'm also fascinated though, just of how have you gotten to this place, right? You started off with your YouTube channel, and then you're writing your book series. You were writing short stories, and then those kind of developed into this Association of Ishtar series, and now you've gotten into games. So, like, talk to me about like how did you get started with all this? How did steampunk charm you into, uh, falling down, into this world and building it?
Well, I mean, for me, it feels kind of like I've always been this way. I always had both fascinations for history and science fiction. So there you go. There's got your steampunk connection. Of course, like most people who got into steampunk, did not know it was really a thing or how it worked. Like my first introduction was a friend brought a book about steampunk GURPS, um, which is also like one of the only systems that I've read so far that really understands steampunk well, like most of all the steampunk games that I've seen, with some Cream is kind of like an exception. Um, but most of the steampunk inspired TTRPGs are fantasy with a steampunk skin. And that's why so many people are now liking my series because it's actually follows the definition of steampunk, which is cyberpunk in the past. So that's for a lot of people a real selling point. Um, anyway, to get back on topic, I really got into steampunk on an event organized by somebody who became a friend of mine, who organized a steampunk event called Emporium Vernesque. It was a very small steampunk convention, like 200 visitors or so. But there I got a book, which I may or may not have on the shelf somewhere. Yes, the Steampunk Gazette, by Major Tinker, which is kind of like this ideal saloon book because it explores like all the facets of steampunk in great detail. It's more of a saloon book with so you can show like people all the pretty pictures and stuff. But that kind of really got me into that. A particular quote by Captain Rob of Ebony Park, who talked about a past that never existed, and that for me, that just really clicked. And I started this blog called Tupperware Steampunk, which was first in Dutch, then in English. And at that same time, I became a big fan of the Nostalgia Critic on YouTube. So I had this idea for starting a YouTube channel, but I was really shy in doing so. For a big part of my life, I've been pretty much a follower. I considered myself somebody who wanted to facilitate other people. It took me a long time to realize, like, no, that's not who I am, or want to be. So that's kind of like led me into the creative journey that's Radio Retro Future. Today, somebody reminded me on Facebook that like they became a fan of mine because of a audio drama I made for a Fallout 4 mod called Old World Radio Boston, which I think is still available as a Fallout 4 mod, which is part of a larger mod, Old World Radio Boston. And there you can listen to me as a kind of like, well, not a steampunk, but a character who is this kind of like retro futurist in a retro futuristic world. Also, I created this entire lore for him, which he reveals throughout the broadcasts. So for that reason, it became a favorite among many listeners. And also, we had this Mr. Handy called ASP, or absent service provider, because my character was also a big absent fiend. So yeah, I never finished the storyline. Like I think I made like all the episodes are still on my YouTube channel, by the way, and it contains like has like dozens of steampunk bands were involved in that. Um, yeah, you can still listen to it, but because of like how YouTube works and copyright issues, it did not get any traction, and you're just like, what? Why am I doing this? Because at that time I also started getting into my own stuff, which was the Association of Ishtar. It started with a short story called "The Call Girl S36." That was the first story I ever wrote, and that was like really the beginning of it all, where I made a lot of decisions that are extremely important to the world building of a series. Now, as I continued writing, I also learned I have a bit of a different view on world building than most people that I speak to. Um, but yeah, that led to a first short story. I kept writing a bunch more. Each of them were files, so they're dialectic pieces that actually, you can literally give these short stories to your players as you play Night Watch. Say, well, this is what you discovered. And yeah, that's eventually I because I also did a podcast on my YouTube channel. I'm skipping a bunch of stuff now, but um there I met some publishers as well, and I reached out to them and said, "Yeah, we love the short stories, but we don't know how to sell this. So could you like write a novel now?" That first novel became The Wrench in the Machine, and that's kind of like the proof of concept. Last weekend, I actually met a person on a fair who said she read that book 5 times by now. Yeah. And so yeah, now people are really liking that book, because there's also nothing quite like it that I'm aware of. So yeah, and that also contains the short stories because that was the whole point, was to prove like a proof of concept of how all these seemingly unrelated files could be connected. Um, and yeah, a friend of mine read that, Sean March. Now he has his own game studio called Shadow Cabinet Games. He reached out to me like, "Hey, would you like to make a game based on the Association of Ishtar?" That's how we got here.
You mentioned just now that you have a different view on world building compared to other people. Can you share a bit more about that? What do you mean?
Well, I make a distinction between world building and world design, right? And what most people talk about when they're talking about world building, they're talking what I call world design, which is where you just decide like the where all the continents are, or the grand histories, kind of like the alternate history, essentially.
Wikipedia
And
of
yeah, and what I notice, especially among who I call aspiring writers, is they get really stuck in that process. And then they'll have like this entire 20-minute story about their world and how awesome they think it is, and then I'll ask them something very redundant like, "Okay, so when I wake up in your world, what will my room look like?" And then they become silent, because they have not considered that. Okay, where does my character do his groceries? Silence again. And for me, that is world building. And I always mention Letters of Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, two Clint Eastwood
Yeah.
movies about the Battle of the Pacific, where he reuses footage from both movies, and but they're both they both have the same world design, but they have two different ways of world building because the perspective is different. So when you switch character, you have to also change your world building because they have a different perspective of things. Like how one character would describe a tower is completely different from how another character could describe one. If you want to give yourself a good challenge of your world, how to world build your world, you would like put five of your characters in front of the same object and describe the building from their perspective. Um, because everyone has their own truth. Uh,
And so how does that actually translate into material? Like, how does it change the output? How do you approach it differently? I understand where does your character wake up? Where do they give you their groceries? Like, that's fascinating. How does that actually turn into elements that you either use or just or don't necessarily use, but like have as influence?
well, when I give my writing workshops, I put a lot of focus on how people write sentences. The order. It can be as simple as like how to structure the interconnection of your sentences and all that stuff. Like you've got, for me, every sentence needs to have an action, right? Otherwise, it becomes exposition. That's how you can tell the difference between exposition and actual storytelling. Because exposition doesn't have any actions. Like nothing's
This is
nothing's
this. This is
happening.
that.
It's
This is
it's it's it's
yeah.
the story just comes to a complete halt, because the characters are not doing anything. Um, and so for me, I really watch like how you write, how do you describe your world on a sentence level? How do characters interact with the world? And particularly that, how do characters interact with the world? If you have a barbarian or like a mage, they can do the same actions, but they would do them completely differently, right? So already there, you've got like a piece of world building, right there. And yeah, so that's the butter is what I call that. When I often critique people, I'll say something like, "Yeah, this sentence doesn't have not enough butter." And what I mean by that is that the characters are doing things, but they're not interacting with the world itself. Like for example, like they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, the character is looking around." Okay, well, what does he see then? Well, and then you gotta actually world build because, okay, well, what does he see? You can say he's looking around, or you can say, well, he's looking at the ruins around him. You get a completely different experience just by the inclusion of the word ruins. I could say the word tree or anything. It's not much, but it's something. Um, So yeah, and then you can like really get into like the embers on the ruins or the burning leaves on the trees, and so you build up your world, like detail by detail.
Increasing the fidelity. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
When then thinking about moving from the book and the series and the story series of the Association of Ishtar after your colleague suggested that, to make an RPG about it, how did you go through that process? And so this game, which is upcoming, is called Night Watch. Briefly, like, what is it? What is Night Watch, and who's it for?
Night Watch is a light TTRPG with simple rules. It's intended for people who either never played RPGs, people who are really into steampunk, and people who are just looking for a steampunk system they can play next to their already far more elaborate role playing games such as Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons. We got a lot of such people who are like, well, we're kind of like done with Dungeons and Dragons. We're looking for something else. I got a lot of that on Spiel in Germany. Um, and yeah, people are like, oh, it's a simple game, so I don't have to like learn a second rule set. Like really, the rules for the checks in the system can be summarized in a bookmark. I know because I've done it. So I give that away during conventions now. And yeah, and it's also a game that I would be interested in learning, because I applied a lot of board game rules in it instead of RPG rules. Like I took a lot of inspiration from, in particular, I think, Reichbusters by, was it by Mythic? Yeah, I think it was done by Mythic Games. And yeah, that's also where kind of like where our fortune system came from. That and Twilight Imperium, which is one of the reasons why I thought Twilight Imperium could be a game I wanted to talk about, because they've got this very amazing strategy system that I really enjoyed, and that's kind of like what the fortune cards are, except they are more narrative focused. So that's kind of like the unique feature about it. That With the base game, we offer a basic set of fortune cards. They're numbered 1 to 10. This is initiative, so you pick a card. You can pick one of these cards for the initiative. However, they also give a boon to the players. However, the one not chosen by the players is a boon to the PM, which is a different one, which is the misfortune. So that can be very powerful. Like you'll be throwing criticals at a three times rate, or they'll spawn new enemies during the combat, or one of the enemies turns out to be a very powerful NPC. Those are some extreme ones, but yeah, it can like give the players advantages that they can take an amount of punishment they usually could not that round, or they'll get a yeah, or the PM gets like a very nasty benefit. But it's all chosen. Like players can get to choose these in order of was the last player last turn. So there's also all kinds of ways to make it a bit more fair. And we do not have a magic system, like I said. Our definition of steampunk is cyberpunk in the past. However, I am kind of like playing with some gas lamp-esque things in there for that particular audience. We're gonna make that a separate expansion, because I presented the rules to my players and readers, and they were like, "Well, we love the ideas, but it will change everything." Yeah, because you're blending fantasy into your sci-fi, and people always talk very lightly about this. Oh, you can just do that. It has no importance. Like they're just the same thing, bro. Trust me. No, they're not. And so yeah, and the problem, it also has the what I call the Vampire the Masquerade problem, is that in Vampire the Masquerade, vampires are supposed to be super rare creatures, like one in a million types of encounters, and yet everyone you meet in the game is a vampire. And that's kind of the problem when you
Introduce,
include
like, magic and
or
yeah.
yeah, when you include or magic system, because once you include one magic user, everyone needs to have like magic users on their side, right? And I'm not like I want to toy more with the idea, but I'm not yet ready to turn it into Shadowrun in the past. But we'll see where it goes, and then where my mind is at in a couple of years, and maybe then I'll love it. So we'll see, and where the players want to take it.
When you're thinking about launching this game, I mean, like, you've used Kickstarter in the past, for, successfully for, launching, stories and other kind of Association of Ishtar series. You're also looking at, using Kickstarter for this, RPG launch, TTRPG launch. Why crowdfunding? Why have you kind of approached that way versus, let's say, talking to a publisher um, or releasing it in another format? Why have you maybe talk through some of the business decisions about why that makes sense?
Well, in part laziness, but also, I
I
mean,
haven't heard of anyone who has said, "Oh, I'm doing Kickstarter because I'm lazy."
well, I mean, it's actually a lot of work, but I don't know, I don't know. Just the problem with like I have worked with some publishers on this, but unless the publisher really says, "Well, we'll invest like thousands of dollars in advertising this product," there's really no point. In my experience, like, because especially when this with the smaller publishers, like, you're just one book on their pile that they need to sell. So, like, the publishers that I worked with, like, did not like, you're still doing all the work.
Yeah, but you're not
So,
getting
like,
higher
really,
percentage. Yeah.
unless you're, like, with a big publisher that is just as passionate about you, about marketing a product, I don't see a point, for narrative books. Like, for games, it's a bit different, I think. Like, especially for, getting my book translated, I've been reaching out, to, some localizers. But because, A, I don't know the languages, and B, I cannot market to these people because of the language barrier, and C, I already have trouble marketing my books in English, let alone, in other, languages. So, I mean, a lot of people go into writing thinking that everyone is waiting for their book, and, once their book is on Amazon, they'll be the next J.R.R. Martin. Um No, it does not work that way. Like, not that I had that expectation. Like, my best sales are really on fairs and conventions. Up to this, like, right now, I'm finally, like, having some daily, activity on my Amazon. But, that you really need to know what you're doing. I recently rebranded my book covers, for that reason. Um and I have the benefit that I can do all the graphic design myself. Um, and that I enjoy graphic design as well. But for example, I did take a PA on recently to do all my book swaps and all that stuff, and grow my email list because at some point, you just get into the mindset. Well, I'm a one person company, and I need employees. Um, and with a publisher, I mean, you're giving away your rights. They are allowed to have exclusive sales rights of your books, and I heard more people being really angry with the publishers than I've seen. Like, I have yet to meet a writer who's like, "Oh, I'm so happy." I never had that conversation, never,
Mhm.
right? Unless they're with really big ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the issue.
Mm. Interesting. So, well, I mean, makes perfect sense, especially if you're happy to wear all these hats yourself and
Well, I
you know,
did not say happy,
happy.
but
Sorry, willing,
willing,
willing.
yeah.
Yeah, that's more fair. Um, Kind of back to steampunk. As a genre, it's fascinating because it's something it's been around now for a little while, and it seems to go through crests and troughs in terms of its popularity. But there's always seems to be this underlying, you know, fandom that's there. And as you say, the definition of steampunk, it's kind of seeped into a lot of other type of genres. But like, why do you think? Obviously, you spoke about how why it's so important to you and what you like about it. Why do you think the genre itself is so appealing?
Well, I mean, what do we mean by the genre? Like, a lot of steampunk that see right now being marketed is mostly fantasy or steampunk skin. Most of it is really Gaslamp, which is a recognized genre by bigger publishers, but it's not really something that really sunk into the public consciousness. So when people something, it's automatically associated with steampunk. So it's and I think that a lot of writers that I talk to, they love writing fantasy. They're not science fiction writers. I mean, they do exist, but I mean, it's really, really, really niche, and it's something. When people talk about steampunk, they usually talk about the aesthetic, not the genre. So when I talk about genre, I could be about steampunk. I could be talking about three different things, which is could be the genre, the aesthetic, or the lifestyle slash costume community. Right, those are three different elements, and those audiences do not really overlap.
Interesting.
So if you're trying to market your steampunk book to the steampunk community, um, they like fantasy more than they like actual steampunk
Yeah.
genres, right? There are people, and um, yeah, not getting onto a spiel on the steampunk costume community, but it there was a lot of misunderstanding about what steampunk is, and what markets you can because there are a lot of people say, "Oh, I love steampunk," right? But what do they mean? Like, do they mean the aesthetic? Usually, um, but for a lot of people, and I hear this a lot from readers who are like, they'll look at me, they're picking up my book, they give it a short read, and then they look at me like this, like, oh, is it alternative steampunk or is it fantasy steampunk? And then they're relieved to hear it's alternate history steampunk, which probably is a far more accurate statement than just saying steampunk at this point. Because, right now I'm drawing in a lot of, history enthusiasts who really love writing the alternative histories in the setting of the Association of Ishtar. And the Association of Ishtar is made for that. What is important to the reason why it's a multiverse is that I wanted to, when I was very idealistic when I created it. And my real idea was that people could like write about our worlds, but from the perspective of the Association of Ishtar. So the Association of Ishtar would go to these other worlds and see the world build it from their perspective. Right? And because of that particular world building, it would still describe somebody else's setting, but their world building would be very different. Um, so that was the original intent. Now I care too much about the main hub world of the Association of Ishtar, so although I have ideas for other worlds, I just do not have I have not been I mean I work a full-time job, so I just have not had time to work on other settings. I mean, they are mentioned, and I'm trying to like imagine, and I'm trying to like include other world sections in the books to like, okay, well, this is something that could happen, and of course, there's all these aliens that come from these other worlds. So I try to kind of like imagine like how these creatures could have evolved or why they have the problems that they have. Um, but, yeah, who knows, if the community grows and people get into the book series, get into the things. I'm trying to develop ways of helping people, like, how do you write, stories like this? And again, I start, like, with the ground level, like the diegetic stories in 150 word pitch, which is also a great an exercise a lot more, writers should do. Um and like, okay, you've got an idea. Okay, well, pitched in 150 words from the perspective of an individual, or from the perspective of a newspaper or a police report, and then that's hard because, like, what people call world building, that's easy. Especially in fantasy, you just make up like all kinds of nonsense connected together. Oh, we have a world now. Ain't I original? Usually not. No. Um, but if you start, like, writing your story from the perspective of, like, a guy waking up, okay, well, what's the world gonna look like? Where is he gonna do his groceries? Where is he's gonna work, right? And you gotta think about that, and you gotta think about, like, how did all this stuff come together? Like, who built the house? I mean, it sounds really irrelevant, but, who built the houses,
Yeah.
you know? Um all that type of stuff. It's kinda like J.J.R. Martin, like, okay, well, they lived heavily ever after. Well, I'm more interested in the king's tax policy, you know? That type of stuff, because when you're writing, like, a character who lives on a farm, he doesn't care about the king's lineage, He's some guy in a faraway country, if you wanna write him a letter, it'll take 5 weeks to get there. You care about the Vikings that are about to invade. That type of stuff, and that's the problem when people talk about, oh, my world, and then they'll talk about like all these great ideas and timelines, and I'm like, why do I care? Like, it's not like I'm gonna physically go there.
Window dressing.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and it's kind of like what I often use the comparison, like it's like writing a travel guide to a place that no one ever is gonna visit.
Yeah.
Um, so and yeah, people think they can, write for the next 10 years without losing interest on a single book. Um, and then there's, of course, the problem that a lot of people assume that everyone's just waiting for their books. And I mean, there is this movement in writing, I think from 1 to 20, and it kind of like promoted this idea that to know that a book is successful, you needed to have like at least 3 books and no longer than 50,000 words. Um, and yeah, that became this really annoyed a lot of readers at some point because everyone was trying to use that strategy. Um, and yeah, but that's how a lot of series were supposed to be written for a while, and I'm kind of doing that right now with some of my miniseries set in my same universe. Um, I wasn't even aware of that strategy at that point, but I just wanted to write some light books, just to have that on the shelf and have some income from that. And because all my books are illustrated, so I need to pay artists.
I'd love to understand a bit about the Association of Ishtar, like the world that you have designed and built, right? You mentioned that there's, this kind of multiverse element to it, which sounds like it's quite expansive and potentially quite inclusive to more people taking part in the universe, or the multiverse that you're developing. But what is the association? What are people doing? How are people engaging in the game?
Okay, so yeah, so the setting of the Association of Ishtar, it takes place in an alternate 19th century, in which anomalies called rifts are appearing all over the world, which are these gateways to other worlds. Now, these cause an influx of all kinds of technology, but also alien threats. And the Association of Ishtar is kind of one of these organizations that is investigating all these anomalies, and of course, more often the aliens that come from them. Um, and they're kind of like the Avenger type characters. They're heavily inspired by kind of like avenging detectives like the Shadow. So they're not the nicest people. They're borderline Inquisition at some points, and how far they're willing to go. That there are a lot of other factions as well. Like in the core rulebook, we have 22 factions included. And that's just kind of like the containment sector, as it's called here, because these rifts are causing all kinds of ecological problems and other subversion and God knows what else they cause. That's the kind of stuff that I explore in all these short stories to kind of like come up with all kinds of interesting aliens and what they represent to this world. Um, so yeah, the association itself, I've written very little about the association itself, to be honest. It's really like I really write all the stories from the perspective of individuals. Um, and the association of Ishtar is really kind of like working on the periphery of all those stories. Um, like one of the characters is an associate or becomes an associate, I should say. But the main character of the first book, The Ranks in the Machine, is invited to join the association, but he refuses and becomes part of another organization instead. Um, but yeah, so the Association of Ishtar kind of like grew into these secondary characters. But I think they work best that way. Because because of their rather macabre character.
And what role does the Night Watch play in that? Like, in terms of this setting, like, what are the players', missions? Like, what are they doing?
Well, the players can take on the role of these associates and investigate anomalies, uncover alien threats, that type of thing. There was also a lot of reverse engineering going on, and the association is one of the factions that kind of is against reverse engineering, although how they handle it is a bit pragmatic. So the players are left to kind of like deal with it their way, as it were, from the perspective of the character, because the Association of History has no real central leadership. They're all volunteers, and that's also by design. Which also leads to all kinds of situations that one associate does not know what the other is doing. but they're dealing with things like body snatchers and that type of aliens, so that's kind of like how they operate. Um, but yeah, they're really right now, because a lot of players are very accustomed to the Dungeon Dragon style of play. We've done play tested a lot of combat on the Discord with both new players and people who never played RPGs before as well. Um, so that's great for the play testing. In our experience, most people can get into it in like half an hour.
Cool. That's great.
And yeah, there's a lot of the characters now made are really combat focused, but the perk system is really made that you can also be like a scientist and make your own stuff. We've got something called the project system that really allows you to like kind of agree with your PM, like, okay, we want to build this, and then the PM has like an easy to use system that says, okay, well, if you want to build this, well, this is going to be the challenge that you're going to have to perform, and then you roll. Um, and that basically allows you to build like bigger vehicles, more complex machines, generate vaccines, do translations, forge documents, etc. Um, with the only resource actually being time. We kind of just assume that you have all the resources just laying around, and you have all the skills that you need, given that you have an example or a blueprint or manual or something in that spirit. Um, so we kind of like this made this system so you can like create projects from analyzing an alien cadaver to, I don't know, building a very complicated Rube Goldberg-esque trap for them. Um, but yeah, that's kind of like the idea that you kind of like become a steampunk 18. That's kind of the ideal for it.
Nice. Steampunk A-Team. Bonsart, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience, to geek out about steampunk, to chat a little bit about Arkham Horror, and just generally kind of dive into this world that you're developing with me today. Um, if anybody out there would like to find out more about Night Watch or the Association of Ishtar series, you can find it on associationofishtar.com, and you can find information about the upcoming Kickstarter on associationforishtar.com/KS. You can find Bonsart on Instagram at Radio Retro Future, and you can also find his YouTube channel by searching for Radio Retro Future on YouTube as well. Night Watch, as part of the Association of Ishtar series, is coming on Kickstarter very soon. You can find out all of the information in the description below this episode. Thank you so much, Bonsart, for taking the time to chat with me.
Yes, you're welcome. Glad to be here.